Kong Skull Island has been released, and whether or not it's better than Godzilla, that's a comparison for another day. But today, we will be comparing it with Peter Jackson's very well received King Kong. Now I assume that you all know the story of King Kong, so I won't explain it and save us all some time in the process. However, I will tell you that when you think about it, both of these stories are more similar than you might think. Peter Jackson's King Kong goes through the traditional story from beginning to end, while Skull Island rushes through the first act and proceeds straight to our characters being trapped on the island. And when they're there, they come across a clan of people, have their first encounter with Kong, fight off a bunch of insects, a couple of side characters get eaten, Kong faces off against a monster, and the humans get their revenge on Kong. Both movies share pretty much the exact same template for a Kong movie, with the exception that in Kong Skull Island, the humans don't take Kong back to New York with them. The pacing are both polar opposites. King Kong is renowned for its crazy slow pacing in its first hour, and it can be so painfully boring at times. Peter Jackson? Why? I mean, seriously man, there's no law that says every movie you make has to be 3 hours, you know? And in Kong Skull Island's case, the pacing is so quick to the point that the characters and narrative both suffer. Which story is better? Well, in my opinion, you can't beat the classic story, and Peter Jackson's version stays true to the original and manages to transform it into a cinematic, heart-wrenching drama as well as a monster movie, and I have not seen that done before. Kong Skull Island just takes a great story and strips it down to the most basic of components and keeps the ones that best fit for a cheesy B movie. So the winner with regards to story is Peter Jackson's King Kong. The characters in King Kong I thought were very good. Granted, they are given far too much time doing nothing and that makes them boring, but once they're on their journey, they become more interesting to hang around with, and some are just downright fun, such as Jack Black. And I'll tell you something else. I was 10 years old when this movie came out and I didn't know any of these actors. I didn't even know who Jack Black was, so to me, these were completely new actors and they still kept my attention. They all felt like real people that had just enough time dedicated to them to establish an arc, and that was enough to make them more than acceptable. They are definitely not the most interesting of characters, but they feel like a real group of people that are forced to survive in this environment. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have the characters in Kong Skull Island, and I downright hated all of them. As soon as they get to the island, within seconds they start dropping bombs and killing a ton of animals and other non-threatening wildlife that live there. And it's not long before they turn a part of the island into a war zone. And it doesn't even startle them. In fact, they actually enjoy it. And that makes these guys practically the villains from Avatar. So I was actually rooting for Kong to take them down. And I hate how in Hollywood, when Americans enter someone else's territory and blow it up, they're the good guys, and when bad stuff happens to them as a result of their barbaric actions, we're supposed to feel sorry for them. But when any other country does it, they are portrayed as the bad guys, and we need a hero to come stop them. That is a blatant demonstration of double standards. It's one of the reasons I love the movie Avatar so much. It actually ditches the typical Hollywood and mainstream media's filtered glorification of America's wars and showcases it for what it really is: terrorism. But in movies like this, when it's America, they want you to blindly accept that it's all right. Well, it isn't, and I really despised these characters, and they could all be monkey food for all I cared.
You're dropping bombs. Scientific instruments.
America.
On top of that, these just feel like caricatures rather than real people, and when you combine that with the poorly written and at times unnatural dialogue with some painfully forced jokes, it results in some pretty crap protagonists. But that wasn't the point of this movie. The movie just wants to establish characters, throw them to the monsters, and watch them survive. So it's a B movie, which is fine if it wants to do that, but when you compare it to the previous King Kong, which had better characters, this really comes off as inferior. So Peter Jackson's King Kong wins this round too. In Kong Skull Island, Kong is created entirely out of CGI and he looks really good. He is far bigger than any of the previous Kongs, and seeing as this movie is based in the 70s, once he comes to our present timeline in 2020, then he will be much larger. Now, although he looks good, visually he looked a lot more impressive during the day, but it was his scenes at night where he started to look fake, and you could tell that he was just a CGI creature. However, I will say that unlike that Godzilla movie where he only got a couple of cameos in his own film, Kong actually has far more screen time in the first 30 to 40 minutes than Godzilla did in his entire 2 hours and 30 minutes runtime. Thank freaking goodness. I also really like seeing Kong take care of the animals on the island. It's just when the movie portrays him as a god that I feel like it's cliched and over the top. Making him, I don't know, a king would have made more sense. A major problem though is that you don't feel sorry for this Kong in the slightest. Kong has always been a sympathetic character, but I felt absolutely no emotional connection to him whatsoever. And that's it, there's not much else I can say about him. In the 2005 version, Kong is performed by motion capture expert Andy Serkis, who is creating all the facial expressions and body movements through, you guessed it, motion capture. And I love the way this version of Kong has turned out. He looks like a normal ape, but his facial expressions are more expressive and you're able to see him emote a lot more purely through facial expressions. Now I know that apes don't usually have the most expressive faces, but seeing as this is a big ape living on the same island with evolved cockroaches and insects, I'm willing to accept it. And considering these effects are almost 12 years old, they hold up really well for the most part. It's only when the actors are in shot that you can tell they are not integrated properly. Also, the amount of screen time Kong has in here completely trounces both screen times from Skull Island and Godzilla combined. And every second of screen time he has serves a purpose. The movie even takes the time to show he has a personality, and surprisingly quickly you actually feel an emotional connection to this Kong, whereas you don't feel shit for this one. So for me, it's no competition. I far prefer Peter Jackson's version of King Kong, and the new one does not even come close. So now we have our Kongs, but which one delivers the best action sequences? Now the action in Kong Skull Island is very dirty. Kong fights monsters by punching and crushing them with his foot, as well as using things in the environment as weapons. And when I say it's dirty, I mean it's dirty in a very similar fashion to a street fight, and visually it looks absolutely marvelous. In King Kong, on the other hand, the fights are even dirtier. Kong will bite the monsters as well as bite off their tongues whilst he simultaneously attempts to rip their jaw and crush their snout, as well as crushing their heads with a huge rock and smashing their heads against a wall. The fights also seem a lot more animalistic. When you look at the way Kong kicks the T-Rex here, you can imagine that an ape would perform an attack like that. In Kong Skull Island, watching him fight is awesome, but it seems very humanly. Now there's nothing wrong with that, as he used to fight that way in the classic movies, but it does come off as more generic. The fighting in Jackson's Kong just seemed more organic, real, and all around more creative. The same goes for the fight scene with Kong and the humans. In Skull Island, he would really just break the helicopters and step on people, and when he would do something more graphic, it would cut away in a typical PG-13 fashion. However, in the Jackson version, again, it was far more creative in the ways Kong would kill people, and it wouldn't cut away when things got a little graphic. Also, Kong fought against 3 T-Rexes that were equal to his size, and he beat all of them in a pretty sweet and kick-ass action scene. In Kong Skull Island, he fights one big monster his size, which lasts for about 5 minutes, and then it's over. And his final attack to kill this thing was kind of weak, and when you compare it to the final move Kong did in the 2005 version, the one in Skull Island was pretty unsatisfactory in comparison. So yeah, the fights are more gritty and brutal in the Peter Jackson movie, and in my opinion, the choreography is far more refreshing and enjoyable to watch. Henry Jackman is the composer for Kong Skull Island, and he is also responsible for the forgettable Marvel Cinematic Universe soundtracks. And yeah, the soundtrack for Skull Island was so generic and it didn't add to any of the scenes. It also felt unoriginal at times. Part of the opening music sounded just like the opening theme from the 2003 Hulk movie. So yeah, the soundtrack here was tacked on, and Henry Jackman continues to prove that he is an uninterested composer who just wants to collect a quick paycheck. The only good soundtracks he has done are X-Men First Class, Uncharted 4, and that final fight scene from Captain America Civil War. Other than that, his soundtracks are so forgettable. The soundtrack in King Kong, however, was composed by the great James Newton Howard, and I tell ya, it is absolutely dripping with atmosphere and emotion, and it really is beautiful. This composer is responsible for such well-known soundtracks such as Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and his style is evident throughout this entire movie. He also took the time to give King Kong a few dedicated theme songs of his own, but my favourite is the one you're hearing right now. It fits so much different intense situations, and this is just an example of Howard's excellent skill for composing soundtracks. So his music absolutely blows away the unimpressive soundtrack from Kong Skull Island. Kong Skull Island feels just like Batman vs Superman in the sense that it was just made to quickly form a bridge to set up a crossover movie. The only difference being that Batman vs Superman tried to pack in too much, whereas Kong Skull Island packs in too little. And although I like that we're starting to get crossovers, I miss the time when a movie could be a dedicated movie as opposed to a big setup for the sequel. The most recent example of a film doing this right was John Wick 2. It told the story we wanted to see, and it also ingeniously set up the sequel. However, you can tell that these films are aggressively holding back because they want to keep the characters in good shape for the next few sequels. And considering that ticket prices are getting increasingly more expensive, I feel like I'm not getting a bang for my buck anymore. When I finished watching King Kong, I felt like I experienced an adventure with legitimate drama and emotions about a freaking overgrown gorilla. With Kong Skull Island, I felt like I finished watching some random people terrorize a populated island, watched 2 cool monster battles, and then the end credits hit. I feel like I've watched something with no substance, and in the end, I felt pretty empty. And quite surprisingly, by the time I got back home, I practically forgot everything about the movie. There is nothing memorable for me to latch onto, and I felt the complete opposite with King Kong. So with that said, it's time for the scores. King Kong gets an 8 out of 10, and Kong Skull Island gets a 5. Also, keep an eye out for these two near the end of the movie. They were both covered in dirt after the climax, but in the very next scene, they are both squeaky clean like they're about to do a modeling shoot. I don't know how they could let a mistake like that pass by, but you could so easily tell that was a completely separate day of shooting. In the comments below, I want you to tell me which of these two Kong movies you prefer, and whether you agree, partly agree, or just completely disagree with me. Also, for those of you that are unaware, I do have a Patreon page, and any donations will be really appreciated as it helps keep the show going. Also, if you donate, you will get various perks such as early access to my movie reviews and even scheduled monthly Skype chats with me where we can discuss the movies I've reviewed or just talk about anything else you fancy. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I will catch all of you next time. Take care.